is Reality Bytes.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 18th of December 2014. Soon be Christmas this time next week, and people will be spending loads of money they don't have again, and paying for it for the rest of the year, no doubt. Got Alan Watt on the line, our regular monthly guest, and this week we're going to talk about an article in Cosmopolitan Magazine written by Lord Birkenhead in 1929. Interesting that this article appeared in a women's magazine when he's talking about test tube babies and artificial wombs and things like that. I don't know how it went down with the women of 1929, but it's interesting. On the front cover, there's a picture of a lady reading a book, and the title of the book is called This Madness. Welcome to the show again, Alan.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be on here.
I suppose we better start off with exactly who Lord Birkenhead was, what his background was, and who his family was. Can you enlighten us on that?
Yeah. His name, I think, was Smith. Actually, it's actually Smith, but they were well connected, and he, of course, he eventually was made Lord, and he became really the Crown Prosecutor for Britain for the establishment, you might say, against big cases, etc. So he was a big player. He also became a member of Parliament and then House of Lords as well. And he actually was involved in an awful lot of things that were happening about that particular era to do with not just the sciences and promoting different sciences and the early Royal Society, but he was also involved in setting up the separation of part of Ireland for the independence, Free State of Southern Ireland and so on. So he worked with Michael Collins on that, and because of that, at least there's a partial independence there. So he was involved in a lot of big world affairs on behalf of, say, the Crown, you might say, or the establishment of Britain of his day. He knew the top scientists of his day. He also knew the different agencies or societies that were helping run Britain, or actually ran Britain anyway, on behalf of the establishment. He knew the Rhodes group, for instance. He knew the Milner group. And he was well aware of all the plans that they had for bringing in the form of world government based initially on the British system. We had to do with free trade, plus the adoption of the British system of supposedly parliamentary systems, massive bureaucracies, and eventually they amalgamate all this into a kind of planetary system. So he was well aware of the big agendas back in his day. But back then, too, we've got to remember, too, that he was born in the 1800s, and in the 1800s, with the advances of science during that time, we can't imagine today really how it was like a blitz of science all at once, from the steam engine that could take across continents, etc. Engines were getting put into ships for the first time, all of this kind of thing. Mass production like never before on a massive scale, and they thought this would never end. They could see with this optimism that science would push on and push on and push on, but they also had, apart from this idea of a global type system, they never thought about equality for the people, really. They wanted an obedient population, well-trained. Training was the big part of it, too. And early psychologists were involved in trying to find ways of creating the perfect culture, basically having obedient, hard-working peoples, etc., etc. And when he wrote that in Cosmopolitan, and if you go through Harper magazines and so on, you'll find a lot more articles very similar to this from other big players around the same period. But they wanted this division of labor that even Karl Marx talked about and so on, and how they discussed in their big meetings how they could breed people for the particular jobs that they would have to do, and therefore for mundane, repetitive jobs, you wouldn't want someone who would get driven crazy because their intellect wasn't being used. You'd literally breed them for the purpose. And in 1929, remember, that was just about 3 or 4 years before Aldous Huxley brought out his book, Brave New World. So he was in touch with all of these people who were all pushing this futuristic society, including H.G. Wells. these weren't just the little closet type meetings they had or after dinner meetings. These were big club establishment meetings they had with all the top players being brought together to run society in the way that they thought it should be run. Not just talk about it, but how to implement it and how to use money to finance the different sciences that would be necessary, including genetics, in fact, to make all this happen, plus the psychologists, early behaviorists, all of these people, which we have today, of course.
Yeah, well, if we start off with the introduction to this, it says, "This is a startling prophetic look into the future. Its author is not a dreamer or a harebrained fanatic. Lord Birkenhead is one of the foremost statesmen in England today. Save this issue of Cosmopolitan, you won't be alive in 2029, but your children's children will be, and it will be interesting for them to check the accuracy of the predictions here made by Lord Birkenhead." And the first one, right off the bat, is babies will be produced by chemists in laboratories. Well, we're well down the road of that. The entire institution of marriage will be changed. Well, that's been done. We'll all live to be 150. Now, I don't know where we are with that one. But no one will need to work more than 2 hours a day.
Hello?
Hi? Hello?
Yeah?
Can still hear.
Oh, that's my echo coming back on me here.
Okay. Carry on.
But what they did, you also find that they had already worked out that the problems, if they allow people to live to that age and be pretty virile and so on, they'd be overpopulated in no time at all. And so at the same time they were discussing all of this back in the late 1920s, they were talking about ways of contraception, etc., and finding ways of contraception. Now, but the thing is, too, before they'd even discovered the gene, they talked about genes quite openly amongst themselves and in their own writings. And it was another book from another person he knew, that Birkenhead knew, and that was Rutherford. Rutherford was the top mathematician of his day with all society. And in his own memoirs, you find that Rutherford talks about, for the last few years, before he died, he wrote his book, but he said, "I've been working on genetics." This is before they could actually see in the genes and so on, and on the chromosomes, etc. And which means that really, yeah, they had already discovered all this stuff a long time ago, because you wouldn't need a mathematician unless you'd actually discovered where they are and so on, and could use a mathematician in the process. It'd be pointless otherwise. So these guys already knew that they could alter life itself way back then, and there was high secret establishments obviously working on these projects.
Yeah, well, I was going to come on to that later on, the beneficial aspects of the technology, which obviously we're not going to get. We're only going to get the technology that's going to be used to put the chains on us, basically. But again, if there was good technology, this prediction would probably come true, that no one would need to work more than 2 hours a day and they'd be allowed to get on and do the stuff that they really want to do. But again, we're not going to get the technology to allow that to happen. But the next one is agriculture will be abolished except as a hobby, and all foodstuffs will be produced synthetically. Well, we're nearly there already with that one as well. Man will be able to alter the geography or climate of the world. Now, they must have been trying this out back then. They must have done all this stuff back then, because he couldn't possibly have predicted this kind of thing without trying it.
Further, this is the odd part of it too, is that coincidence or not, but the fact is, if you read The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon, you find that in that book he talks about a machine underground which could give off the light of the sun and control the weather. I mean, this has always been a fascination with these guys all down through the centuries, is total control of the environment and everything in the environment, including us. And so you find that he revived that same idea simply because of the scientific elite he was mixing with Birkenhead. And sure, they were putting so much of our tax money. This is the beauty of it too. They can use as much tax money as they want for all the quiet, secretive research, and actually start using it and so on. So I think it's been that way for an awful long time. If it can be done, and he said the same thing, it will be done. if it can be done, it will be done, no matter what it is. You couldn't stop science, he said. Therefore, they thought about the ways they could use these things for their own benefit, not for the general public necessarily, but for their own benefit. But the odd thing was, back in the 1960s, there was a big spate again from this hurrah thing from science and the BBC in England, where they're putting all these articles out on the future back in the early 60s, when they wanted this big, the public to have their old system destroyed, you might say, to rebuild the new one. The hippie era, etc. And in the 60s, it said the same things, that eventually it'll be a privilege to get a job. You won't need a job. You'll be well looked after. Your whole, but leisure would be your biggest problem. How do you pass your time? No one would be poor. No one would be starving, etc. So they keep giving you these carrots all the time to get the public on board with this hurrah, hurrah, hurrah for science and the constant massive taxations for research and development, for a future which you're never going to get yourself. Life extension, I have no doubt whatsoever, actually exists. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that in the film H.G. Wells' film The Time Machine, we see all the people just lazing about all day and doing nothing whatsoever, and that's supposed to be the utopia we're all promised. And I remember the scene where the lady falls into the river and nobody can even be bothered to get up and save her. It's just, that's it. Right. She fell in the river. She was so stupid. So that's that. The life extension. We never see the likes of the Kissingers of this world or the Rockefellers ever getting ill or getting cancer or anything of this sort. The Royals, they all live to over 100. The basic human life is well capable of reaching 100 years old if they get the right food, nutrition. And just stay healthy, So in terms of life extension and technology, how do you have you any information on how that's been done?
Yeah, I'm sure they're well into disease itself. It's not a one-on-one thing per bacterium or per virus, etc. All you have to see, what they did a long time ago, is to see what all viruses have in common and what all bacterium will have in common with each other, and we can simply eliminate the process as it divides and so on and multiplies. We can simply hit all bacteria at the same stage and kill it off immediately. I'm sure there are real inoculations there that were developed a long, long time ago. The Kissingers, as you say, the Brzezinskis are still trotting across the whole planet. You've got Maurice Strong, who's a good age now, still running around the planet giving these speeches and giving the royal carpet. None of them suffer from what you call aging diseases, such as Alzheimer's, arthritis, any of those things. Old David Rockefeller, same thing. So you just cannot have that in a person. They've got to have something wrong with them. But these guys are literally, they're full of energy. The energy they have could put a modern 20-year-old to shame at times. And the food they eat is the richest, best food. It's not GM food. It's not soaked in pesticides and so on. I'm sure they've never had any inoculations that we get, and yet they go on and on. So I'm sure that they're given life extension to do with literally what David Suzuki, another big top lefty world government character, David Suzuki said a few years ago on the CBC, on national television in Canada, he said, and he's a geneticist by profession, actually, and he's a guy who also said to his students, it's up there on YouTube, that people are just maggots. There's different levels of maggots. Some of the richest maggots simply poop on the ones beneath it, and they live off the poop from the ones above. That's David Suzuki's arrogant stance on these things. But he said that we at present have the capability to stop the aging in your genetic makeup and make a person live to 500 if we want to.
Yeah, I did hear that.
There's no stir about that at all.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to we've done the controlling the weather. Coal mining will be an extinct industry. Well, that's basically happened. For all intents and purposes, in the UK, it's completely gone. Regardless of the fact, I think we've got estimated 300 years worth of the stuff still under the ground. A 48-hour day will come into being by retarding the rotations of the Earth. Now, I don't know why they would want to do that, but as you say, these guys think you can't stop science, so you've just got to try it out. If you can do it, let's try it. It doesn't matter how dangerous it is. Let's do it and see what happens. But one of the ones that is that everybody should recognise is sitting in our homes, we will see and hear events the world over. I mean, this is before television supposedly invented. But here we are. We can at the click of a mouse, we can watch any news channel all over the world, and be told apparently what's going on in those countries. These I don't know how far back the invention of television goes, but we're told it only happened, around about the time of between the First World War, Second World War. How far back do you think this kind of technology goes?
Oh, they were experimenting with television in the early 1900s on small scales. As far as we know, it could be on much bigger scales, but on small scales for sure. And you'll find depending on which country you're born into, you get a different version of who invented what and when. Every country claims to be the inventor of the TV, and Russia did that, and things like that. But also Marconi and his radio and transmission, etc. Other ones supposedly did it before him. You'll find that there's so much conflicting data that you have to stand back and wonder how old the technologies actually are. Don't forget that even in the days of Benjamin Franklin, everybody was experimenting with Leyden jars, which they called batteries at the time of electricity. So scientific institutes have been experimenting quietly with this stuff for an awful, awful long time. And it's a quite natural progression when you look at the purpose of how government sees itself, or the establishment that owns it all, and how they see themselves is they rule, they must be protected, they want to take over resources, etc., in other countries under different guises. It doesn't matter what guise it is. And you're always going in to liberate or free up or tame the wild savages kind of stuff as you plunder. But the fact is, and warfare is the biggest power that they have. Therefore, it would be fantastic to see what an enemy is doing. And they speculated about having cameras in the sky back in his day, that kind of thing. Now we have drones as well all over the place. So it was a natural thing to put a lot of money in an investigation and unlimited funding from taxes. That's the whole thing. Into hiring lots of scientists to work consistently on a problem which they'd eventually have to solve. It would just simply happen, throwing money at it, putting the minds behind it, lots of experimentation. Eventually you would get your product. So what you're seeing is directed science. The present society we live in is actually being directed to be this way, not because they could have gone off in 1,000 other directions, but because the establishment wanted these particular things for control purposes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get on to. Basically, the technology we're given is to fit in with the overall agenda. We're never going to get technology which is going to benefit us. And
that's right.
Anybody looking around can see that. The only thing they've given us that's supposedly to benefit us is the TV and the computer, and the mobile phone.
And the TV was the biggest brainwashing tool there is.
Yeah, of course. And that'll convince people that all the technology is coming as beneficial to them. But I've heard you talk before, you mentioned the behaviourists involved in these kind of meetings as well. And, I mean, back then, were they studying the effects of bringing in this kind of surveillance society? And did they know exactly how it would change people's attitudes or behaviour?
They had experimental hospitals, actually, on the go in Russia, early Soviet Russia. The Bolsheviks immediately went into experimenting on the human brain by really crude, nasty methods of taking skulls off whole wards of patients. You actually see old video of them with the skulls removed and doing the test probes of different parts of the brain. They're also sharing the data with Tavistock in England. And the Tavistock Institution is where Aldous Huxley was in and out of all the time. He was fascinated by the ability to insert basic electrodes or stimulate by simple electricity parts of the brain and have people turn right and left and be obedient, things like that. So they were wired at the time, so we're told. They didn't have the wireless, we're told. But I don't see why they couldn't have with the early remotes, etc., have eventually put in wireless remotes into the brain, like Delgado did in the U.S., and he worked with CIA and FBI. So this has always been a thing with them, to map the whole human brain. Pavlov was way into that thing. It wasn't just dogs he was working on. It was humans too. They had a captive population. They could simply round up 1,000 people overnight under any guise at all, under counter-revolutionary, and bring them in and simply experiment on them, and that's the last people ever saw of them. They were used as human guinea pigs. So they had literally little enclosed societies of experimentation. In the West, we know that Tavistock was heavily involved in this, with patients again that no one would ever see again. The relatives either wouldn't visit, or the relatives, or there were no relatives. They were even better to do all the electrical stimulation in the brain, etc. But they also had experimental schools. That was a big part of it too. And Lord Bertrand Russell also, who also knew Birkenhead, Lord Bertrand Russell was given permission to set up an experimental school in England for quite a few years, heavily funded, enclosed from the rest of society, to bring children up under a completely different reality, all a very closed system. And he said, if we want to, we can tell them that snow is white and the sky during the day is black, and things like that. And they believe it because that's all their whole reality, the Plato's cave kind of thing. And he also tried to promote pre-pubertal sex. It's just the idea being that if we can hyper-sexualize children before puberty, they'll really be hyper-sexualized afterwards, and they'll never want to have a partner for the rest of their life. So they would finish the institution of marriage for the general population. So these things were all done way back in the 20s and the 30s, in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, well, of course, that was... Yeah, that was one of his predictions, that marriage would be changed forever. Well, it's virtually non-existent these days to any great extent. He talks a lot in the first page of this about alternative energy, and admits that the cheapness of this energy, supposedly, will destroy the lives of millions of people, and he talks about the cheap energy creating all kinds of acute social problems, but he doesn't actually state what they are, apart from the fact that it's going to destroy the livelihoods of millions of people. That would you have any kind of opinion on that? What exactly he means by that?
Well, the livelihood really is that things would become computerized down the road. Mechanical robots, which you say would do most of the heavy work, etc. You wouldn't need the workforce as we know it today. And remember, too, that Julian Huxley and Aldous Huxley, the two brothers, both talked about the same thing about the same time, when they said that there are different strata of society that rule this system. And they said at the top, you have a dominant minority that has the power, the money, and so on. That's why they'll never give up their hold on what we think of as money, that we think is normal, but it's all a rigged system. And they don't need the money as a system for control. But they said under that they have a scientific elite. It says the Huxleys, they belong to the scientific elites. And along with their kind of sciences, you had the social sciences coming in big time then, psychology, behaviorism, and so on. And you also had the chemists coming in, and so on, and biologists, etc., that give you inoculations, all these kind of things. So they talked about the total control of society to try and alleviate the problems they'd have when they had a massive population, which they wouldn't need anymore. But they didn't want them to rebel either, so they gave them lots and lots of entertainment. But at the same time, they'd have to sterilize them quietly along the way. And they mean quietly. In other words, they wouldn't come out and admit it. The symptoms would obviously be there as they are today, but they won't come out and admit it. They've been doing it deliberately. And eventually, the worker type who hadn't evolved, because evolution is a big part of this, the belief system, the working force that did the mundane jobs wouldn't be needed. They'd be obsolete. and they hadn't evolved any higher and never could evolve any higher. If they could evolve higher, they'd have done it already. That was their whole stance on all of this class system at that particular time. Hasn't really changed, by the way. But so eventually, if you go from book to book, from the characters who all knew each other and discussed this in their big meetings, you'll find that H.G. Wells had, in his book called A Modern Utopia, where he projected how the future would be, he said that we used to think we'd have to simply kill the excess population, which were irrelevant nowadays for the future. He said, but we took the kinder way and simply sterilized those people so they couldn't reproduce. They could live their life and then die off, and none of their offspring to cause any problems. So every part of the topics of how all of society works had been gone over by different little think tanks in its particular day. It's much bigger today, of course, naturally.
Yeah, getting back to the advent of television, as he predicts, he even actually used the word television before television was invented. It says here, during the next 100 years, applied physics will certainly develop wireless telephony and television beyond our present most imaginative expectations. By 2029, it should be possible for any person sitting at home to be present. He's got that in inverted commas, so it's almost like a virtual reality he's talking about here. At no matter what distant event, stereoscopic television at full natural colours and perfected wireless telephony will enable him to see and hear any event which is broadcast as effectively as if he stood beside the transmitting apparatus. And then he goes on to say, you talked about its propaganda uses. Such developments must influence the future of politics, for by their aid it will be feasible once more to revive that form of democracy which flourished in the city-states of ancient Greece. So there's the plan laid out. That's where they want to go with it all, back to ancient Greece, where they can sit in their ivory towers and just throw bread and stuff to the peasants, basically.
That's right. And also that is what the think tank for the British military came up with back in 2008, I think it was. It was the big 90-page report which I put up on the website, cuttingfreeimages.com. And remember, this particular think tank is the Department of Defence's think tank for Britain and NATO, all NATO countries. And they said that eventually, by the 2050 or whatever, they think that countries will simply be, like Karl Marx said, that they would wither away. You can see why they both work together, these two systems, the dialectic. And nation-states would survive. Certain nations or city-states would survive, and they actually mentioned some of the city-states that they wanted to keep, and other ones which may or may not be allowed to go in. The rest of the what used to be countries would become barbaric and wastelands as folk died off, etc.
And it carries on
here. It would be
here.
privately run, by the way, privately owned. Yeah.
Yeah. So it carries on the political argument to advancing television. By 2029, the chosen spokesman of each political party will be able to address every voter as effectively as he now can address the House of Commons. And so the electorate itself, rather than its representatives, may decide each vital political issue. After the spokesman of each party has had his or her say, the votes of the entire country could be recorded and counted by mechanism installed in the telephone. Within 20 minutes from the end of the last speech, the will of the national jury on any subject could be ascertained and announced. Now, that's obviously pertaining to electronic voting. From home, you don't have to go out and put your X in the box anymore. You just have to listen to this talking head on the television. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, he actually says his or her. I mean, this was in the day when women were still in the kitchen and, kind of weren't really in the workforce as such. But he's clearly stating that there will be, the heads of parties will be women in the future as well. And here we are. It's all been done. And it is, as you say, it's the most effective propaganda tool on the planet. And when we see these guys getting up there pontificating on one issue or another, people just buy it.
They buy it. And again, what Birkenhead said, I think, was he said that big decisions could then be more egalitarian. In other words, that the people would decide. That was the carrot that the writers of his particular era were putting out there, this wonderful future utopia. They had to get the people to go along with all of this, so you offered them the carrots, it's going to be a wonderful life for you, etc. making them think that you're all going to be one of the chosen. And even Julian Huxley said the same thing. He says lots of the people who are working for our agenda think they're going to be chosen to come through, and they're sadly mistaken. So they must always use the masses to go along with their own demise. That's the technique that's always used, because they had no intention of letting the public decide anything. On the other hand, too, they also knew how decision-making is made by the general public. It's all to do with information. They knew they can always guide the public into making the so-called correct decision or correct vote by putting the things across in the right manner to the public. So they can count on the public to vote the way they want them to vote.
Yeah. Well, he goes from physics to chemistry, and he starts off by saying applied chemistry has not affected human life in a manner comparable with the changes produced by physical research. So far as the ordinary man is concerned, chemistry is only useful to him when it discovers new and desirable substances, in other words, drugs, or discovers a means of synthesizing a material more cheaply than it is produced in nature. In the past, chemists have enriched the resources of humanity with new metals, dyes, drugs, explosives, and other substances useful in industry or in private life. By 20,000 more such new substances will be available. Aluminium will be cheaper than pig iron is today. Malleable, unbreakable glass will be a commonplace of domestic life. And what struck me with that is we hear a lot in the US about, I'm sure it's the same in Canada, about this drive to legalise cannabis. And the young people I've spoken to here are all for it. They're going to vote for this guy because he's all for legalising cannabis. And I was trying to say to them, but it won't be this cannabis you're buying now. It's going to be the stuff that they produce for you. And it isn't going to be organic. It's going to be synthetic and possibly genetically modified. And you won't know what you're smoking. I mean, is that where we're going with that?
Yeah, you find that even Aldous Huxley came up with the same idea in his book Brave New World, 1933, and so he came up with Soma. Soma would give them to the general public to keep them quiet and passive in a state of ecstasy, basically, no matter what they had to work at or the miserable conditions they lived in. And, of course, we know that the military, for instance, some of the strongest marijuana out there was created by the military, genetically modified, etc. And there's no secret either for those who are working in the medical profession on post-mortem or autopsy. There's no secret whatsoever that it does go in and it does start to enlarge the ventricles inside the brain, which destroys systems around that particular ventricle area. You produce less L-dopa, things like that. So it can make you very, very passive down the road, regardless if you stop taking it or not. It does has a permanent effect eventually.
Yeah, he goes on, it has also been suggested that chemical research will turn to the discovery of new psychologically pleasant substances. Again, there's your Soma for you. At present, civilized mankind has discovered and adopted only 3 such substances: tobacco, alcohol and caffeine. These certainly have added enormously to the amenities of existence, and Dr. J.B.S. Haldane has proposed that chemists should seriously consider a search for many more such additions to human enjoyment. Of course, Haldane was a eugenicist, I believe. Most chemical substances are either disagreeable or dangerous in their physiological effects, though a small number, not more than a few thousand, are valuable to medicine. Should chemistry in the next 100 years be able to discover a dozen substances as pleasant harmless, yet each producing a different effect on the consumer, it will have earned the thanks of every hard-worked man and woman in the world. In other words, you go to work, you have a really bad day, and then you come home and take your dose of drugs to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
Like I suppose many people do with alcohol today.
They do today with drugs and alcohol, yeah.
So, a
lot of the drugs today are prescribed by the doctors for all their depressions and so on and so on. And there's nothing about getting to the bottom of depression or why you're depressed. It might be the rotten job that you're doing and this monotonous existence that you're in. So pharmacology has no intention, of course, of finding the problems. Their whole point is to get you drugged so you don't think about the problems and you drift through life in a kind of fog, a happy fog. And most medications out there are prescribed by doctors. Also, even the prescription medications in some areas in the States especially, maybe elsewhere too, but there's been documentaries about the States in some areas. They're just prescribing OxyContin for anything, any problem at all. Doesn't matter what it happens to be, until they've got whole parts of U.S. states hooked on this stuff. And it's all prescribed by doctors, and they're getting away with prescribing this stuff, which means it's part of an agenda. It has to be.
Yeah. Paula was talking to somebody earlier today or yesterday about medication she's on, and now this lady's to go for a liver biopsy. And Paula's trying to say to her, well, it's the drugs that you're on that are causing the liver problems. You need to get off them to start with. I mean, I don't suppose her doctor's told her that. But it's just one thing after another. One side effect's got to be cured by another pill, which will cause another side effect, and on it goes. But he moves on. He starts talking about painkillers and anaesthetics. And he immediately relates it to painless childbirth. And then he goes on to say, biologists by 2029 will have learned the secrets of the living chemistry of the human being, or at least enough of it to achieve startling results. Rejuvenation will be an ordinary and well-recognised matter of a few injections at appropriate intervals. The desire to keep old age at bay has ever been one of the dreams of humanity. At least we can predict that it will be achieved. This mortal to put on mortality by extending the length of his days on earth. He's got that phrase there. This mortal must go on, put on immortality. That's a direct quote from somebody? I don't know if you know who that is. But anyway, the attraction of such an idea, especially to women who will no longer grow old quickly, is too clear to require emphasis. Now we've seen, I mean, particularly the likes of Cosmopolitan Magazine itself, the promotion of women have to stay young, they have to stay beautiful to get on in the world, or to get the best jobs and all the rest of it. And he's again, we talk about propaganda, and like Stalin, Hitler, they knew that you had to target the women. So here we are, we've got the women pressurized into doing this, to stay young, look young, and all the rest of it. And it goes on to say, but the universal practice of rejuvenation will be accompanied by grave social problems, the least of which would be the immense increase in population. So it brings in population. Suppose it possible to guarantee 150 years of life to every healthy child. How will youths of 20 be able to compete in the professions or in business against vigorous men, still in their prime at 120, with a century of experience on which to draw? The benefits to humanity which will accrue if the lives of men are so prolonged is obvious. So he's talking about themselves there. We'll all benefit if these guys are allowed to live to 150 and the wealth of experience, but we're not going to get life extension because we're just not worthy enough.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And also too, the whole point was to create a person with a genius level through manipulation prior to, again, exogenetics, etc. And they would do it before, outside the womb, basically. They could literally piece a person together with different genes, etc., which they are doing, by the way, on the quiet, and have been doing it for years, for women who are childless, where they get their ovum, etc., extracted, a whole bunch of them, and that's the last women will see of what's actually happening. But it isn't simply matching it up with a spermatozoon somewhere. It's actually they're actually taking genes out and putting genes in and following the children who actually get born from these experiments. They're following them down through their lives to see how they react, behave, etc. And they're being well studied with other nothing. So it's been going on for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually goes on to that in the next paragraph. He says, most probably by 2029, a clever young man will consider his fiancée's hereditary complexion before proposing marriage, and a young woman of that day will refuse him because he has inherited a gene from his father which will predispose his children to quarrelsomeness. By intelligent combination of suitable genes, it will be possible to predict with reasonable certainty that truly brilliant children shall be born of a marriage. It is possible, however, that by 2029, the whole question of human heredity and eugenics will be swallowed up by the prospect of ectogenetic birth. By this is meant the development of a child from a fertilized cell outside its mother's body in a glass vessel filled with serum on a laboratory bench. I was talking to Suzanne Postle a couple of weeks ago, and there's a group called, I think it's 23andMe, who will do a genetic test on you, and they match you up with somebody to marry based on your genetic traits and your compatibility. Nothing to do with attraction, nothing to do with emotion, It's just your genetics and to make sure you have the right kind of children. So that's happened, and now we've got private agencies coming out and advertising their wares. And it goes on to say, such a proceeding is neither incredible nor indeed impossibly remote. The results of much research show that the connection between a mother and her growing child are purely chemical. There is no valid reason why one day biologists should not be able perfectly to initiate that chemical connection in the laboratory. So again, we're not humans with emotional attachments or physical attachments to the children we have, but it's just all chemical. We shouldn't really bother getting emotionally attached to the children because they're just a bunch of chemicals, and that's it. The possibility of ectogenetic children will naturally arouse the fiercest antagonism. Religious bodies of many different creeds will rally their adherents to fight such a fundamental biological invention. Well, he's just said it's all chemical, but now he's saying it's biological, so there's a contradiction there, surely. In fact, the mere mention of the possibility here may strike many readers as gratuitously disgusting. It is. Nevertheless, the thing is possible, and since it is possible...
What's interesting there is that you find that remember that the elite themselves have really many psychopathic traits developed over centuries of inbreeding. Powerful people who seek power, are pretty ruthless, etc. And they marry the daughters of successful, ruthless other people who are very wealthy and so on. So they have psychopathic traits, and they send their own children off at a very early age. I mean, first of all, a nanny will raise them. And so the bonding doesn't take place for the elites between the parent and the offspring that have more in common with their nanny, actually, for the rest of their lives than they do with their mother, for instance. Then they're sent off to boarding school, etc., etc. And so they don't develop what the normal folk have, who raise their own families, etc. But they do understand that normal folk do raise their own families. So they're talking about themselves and projecting their own view of it onto everyone else at the same time. But at the same time, they do understand how the ordinary folk literally have their families grow up in their own households with them. So you have to understand their point of view and the fact that what they did was the norm for their whole class, to send your children off and stiff upper lip, don't show emotion, etc., to your own family members. So that's why they were all for this idea it was chemically based, etc., rather than the fact that it was actually a class system and psychopathy that couldn't let them bond even with their own children at times.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes on again. Nevertheless, the thing is possible, talking about ectogenetics, and since it is possible, it is certain that scientists will be deterred by no persecution from straining after it. In other words, no kind of morality or ethics is going to come into this. They're just going to do it anyway, regardless of any public outcry. And he says, should ectogenesis ever become an established part of human society, its effects will be shattering. Primarily, it will separate reproduction from marriage, and the latter institution will become wholly changed. Further, the character of the future inhabitants of any state could be determined by the government, within thoroughly to enjoy power. By regulating the choice of the ectogenetic parents of the next generation, the cabinet of the future could breed a nation of industrious dullards, or leaven the population with 50,000 charmingly irresponsible mural painters. A further immediate consequence of the ectogenesis would be a plea that society should be allowed to produce the human types it most needs, instead of being forced to absorb all the unsuitable types which happen to be born. So again, we're right back to eugenics again. The whole thing is about eugenics, and nothing to do with bettering society. Well, not for the vast majority of society, but certainly to benefit these guys. And that's all it's about. Yeah. It's not about science. It's not about promoting science. Yeah. Many of the arguments brought against slavery would be powerless. Talking about breeding intelligent creatures to perform intricate drudgery, yet lacking all ambition. What ruling class would resist the temptation? So again, there's no morality. They're just going to go for it. And it says many of the arguments brought against slavery would be powerless in such a case, for the ectogenetic slave of the future would not feel his bonds. And I think that's where we are now. We're just going along day to day, paying our tax.
Well, we are. You can look at slavery, as long as you don't use the terms. You can live in a communist society. We have all the trappings of communism, but not call it communism. You can call it the Liberal Party or the Social Party or whatever, but it's still the same thing. As long as you don't use actual terms, the average person won't relate it. It's rather strange that they won't relate it to what actually exists. And he's talking about the same thing there. Slavery can be made very enticing if you don't call it slavery. You simply say you have to give so much data to use this program or app or whatever it happens to be, but look at all the benefits you'll have. So you entice them into it, giving up voluntarily piece by piece until they are an actual slave to the whole system, including their cell phones. In fact, they're having breakdowns when they lose them now, a lot of young folk. So it's working very, very well. People don't realize you give up your freedoms for some other reward. Very simplistic. You see, they did all with rats and animals, which was nothing to do with to see if they could train an army of rats. It was all to see if they could be used, all these experiments would be used eventually on humans. Would you give up your own ability to survive independently or think independently for all these rewards? And unfortunately, the answer seems to be yes.
Yeah, he goes on talking about slavery. Every impulse which makes slavery degrading and irksome to ordinary humanity would be removed from his mental equipment. His only happiness would be in his task. He would be the exact human counterpart of the worker bee. Only the arguments of religion could be used to prevent his evolution, and again that's why we're seeing the destruction of religion. His emancipation could never be considered. For his freedom he would find only crushing boredom and misery. Well, I think I'd rather have the crushing boredom than misery than be a slave, to be honest. I don't see how slavery can be enjoyable. But obviously, again, going back to Brave New World, when they issued out the Soma, these people were just mindless automatons and just did a specific task all day, got the Soma, came back, did the same thing day after day after day, and they're all dressed the same. The uniformity of the uniform, the brown overalls or the dungarees, and it carries on. It seems improbable, however, that the future development of industry will call for such a being to tend its wheels. Production will become so cheap, and barring political or international upheavals, wealth will accumulate in such an event, to such an extent that the ectogenetic robot will never be needed. It is far more likely that men will work as machine minders for 1 hour a day and be free to devote the rest of their energies to whatever forms of activity they enjoy. So there's a carrot being put out to people to say, oh yeah, you'll have to do a couple of hours a day and get to do what you want after that. But if you've already been given all these drugs to keep you happy, this is a kind of a contradiction to that, to say that if you had to work a 40-hour week, you wouldn't be happy. So I mean, which is it?
Again, they said in the 60s when they revived all this idea, to get to accept science as your new God, you might say, a wonderful Santa Claus, that eventually you'd have this utopia, and even had huge displays in all the top magazines and the newspapers across Britain and the rest of the world of people walking about, drawings of folk walking about in togas, Roman togas for goodness sake, all with smiles on their face. That was going to be the future they depicted in the 1960s, and they got it all from previous agendas, which actually the same agenda which had never stopped from even before Birkenhead's time. Now, Birkenhead also knew Francis Galton, the Darwin, Francis Galton, and the Darwin family, and remember too, in the next million years, written by Francis, he said we're now in the process of creating a more sophisticated form of slavery, and that was back in the 1950s. So you're simply living through an agenda. I've always known this, and all of these things that keep coming up in your own lifetime simply show you're living to a timetable. In fact, as I say, sciences, all the sciences are directed by funding. The funder tells them what they want them to look for or how to do something, and they have to achieve that goal. It's not willy-nilly. Just finding out by this for the purpose of inquiry and finding things out. They're actually all directed along this one agenda, and we're living through it today. Hello?
Hello? Not got you again.
Hello?
Hello. Hi. Just the last few paragraphs of this, he gives a kind of brief conclusion. Very, very brief. I've assumed that the rate of progress in applied physics, chemistry and biology during the next 100 years will be maintained approximately at its present level. It may even be greatly accelerated by the ever-increasing interest in scientific research on the part of industrialists and governments. So you've got your corporations and your governments working together to do all this. Nevertheless, unless science is able to change our ideas no less rapidly than our environment, some of the developments at which I have hinted may not come to pass. Unless, for example, the ideas of Asiatic peoples are drastically changed, it will be impossible to stamp out epidemic disease from the world. So, I don't know what is he hinting at the fact that the Asiatic peoples had their own kind of medicines and things like that, and kind of went down the natural medicine route, or is he just being racist?
Well, I think it was a hidden thing really in some ways, because you see, at that time the Western world was all under one kind of system, starting from the Alfred Milner group, Royal Society, into the Royal International CFR, basically, it's called across the whole planet. There's the Royal Institute for International Affairs that was to run this global system, but by that time they didn't have very China in on it. And so unless you get all the vaccinations that are, once again, there to help you, they couldn't make all of this happen, because that vaccinations, I'm pretty well certain, are really not there to help you at all. People are becoming incredibly sterile. With every generation that passes, it gets worse and worse. It's the vaccinations, it's also the food system they give you too. They know all this too, of course, and it's well documented at the very, very top. You can't study their graphs as to population and demographics of people who are becoming more sterile in certain areas without looking at all the inoculations that have been given, what batches of inoculations and so on. So it is working, as I said, because one of the big problems was it didn't want too many folk around in a post-industrial society, which they've been talking about, by the way, since the beginning of the 1900s. They knew that there would eventually be a post-industrial society, and you wouldn't need all the labor and workers, etc. So the best way to do it, like H.G. Wells said in The Modern Utopia, is to quietly sterilize them, and they'll simply die off, and they won't procreate. They might enjoy life to an extent, and they'll die off. So that's actually happening today. It's also the excuse for the mass immigration into Britain, for instance, that Margaret Thatcher used. She says we must bring in mass immigration because the people aren't having enough children. It wasn't just because they weren't having enough children, it's because so many of them are becoming sterile. And all the studies have shown that, the males especially, the sperm count is almost zilch today, active sperm. And same in the U.S. This is with the 18-year-olds, by the way. They do these surveys every single year. They all show an increasing sterilization, and apparently it's not a crisis. Why isn't it a crisis? Because it's meant to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. He finishes off basically what we talked about earlier, that science can be used for good or bad, but it's not self-evident that all applications of scientific discovery deserve the support of intelligent men and women. So in other words, if there's something that's going to benefit the masses, they're not going to support it. Because science has benefited humanity in the past, there is no reason why it always should do so in the future. And then he goes on to say, but this might all change if somebody sets off an atomic bomb and just wipes us all out, so his predictions would be meaningless. But he probably knew that wasn't going to happen either. But yeah, I mean, he's clearly stating that the only science that's going to be supported is the science that they wanted, that's going to benefit them. It's not going to benefit humanity in the wider sense. It's only going to benefit this small group at the top who's controlling it.
Yes. It's always been that way, really. You know?
Yeah, but it's nice he actually admitted it.
Entertainment value. You get entertainment value from the television and so on, but you also be indoctrinated all the time with the TV as well, with new ideas on how to behave, what your marriage is or should be or could be, or what promiscuity should be, etc., or how correct the state should be and how much power the state should have with all their SWAT teams and their dramas and so on. Everything you see on television to do with police or the medical establishment done in a drama form, a series or a movie, is all propaganda, as Jacques Ellul said, and he was a great philosopher. It's there for propagandic reasons, to give you a false idea, so as you'll obey that these what used to be services, police services were services. You could also cancel the contract with them. Same with the health care, it could be cancelled. But like Lenin said, I think he was in on the same agenda too, by the way, using the Soviet system as a laboratory. That's why the West set it up, the Soviet system. Lenin said that they would win through slogans, which would be put across, just repetitive slogans or phrases, etc. Repetition works on the human mind, and they would win that way. The best way to do, of course, is through radio, television, movies, and so on. And it's all pretty well happened since these guys were on the go. But Lenin also said that services, the West will proliferate with services, child care services, police services, healthcare services, and these services, which are voluntary, whether you wanted it or not. You could say, no, I don't want that. Now you can't. Now there are authorities. That's what he said. Their job is to turn and train the public into that they are the authorities. That's what you have to do. So you're run by authorities from birth to death, you see.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. That was Birkenhead predicting what was going to happen up to 2029. A quick prediction of what you think is going to be 100 years down the line.
I think they're pretty well achieved it because the public adapt all the time. The whole theories that came out of Darwinism with adaptation, etc., are very true, and they're heavily sunk into the whole scientific revolutions and the funding to do with people managing people. This is the big job today, through managing people, world managers, people managers, social managers, all these managers. And now you have managers basically appointed by the government in Gerfek for Scotland, appointed to every child that's born, basically, to make sure they can tweak you before you get any self-thoughts or own thought from yourself. No, they're going to make sure you get the state's authorized thoughts. So it's all here. Management from birth to death is already underway. The Gerfek program is called Other Names in Other Countries, all coming from the United Nations, by the way. It's really all began in the United Nations under the rights of the child. So who just had their big meeting there again, the rights of the child. And all they talked about was the rights of children to be indoctrinated in the LGBT agenda, etc. So the whole idea to destroy all that was to bring in the new. You must always destroy the old to bring in the new. That's the thing I always repeat. And that's been awfully successful. The think tank for the British Department of Defence also said the same thing, that by 2050 they said that the population would drastically show a drastic decrease in population. That included China. It was already well underway in the West until people say in some say the native Scots and so on, etc., were already under the numbers for reproduction and sustainability for themselves. So they're just fade off the map, actually. Things like that. So this all came out from the top think tanks for the Department of Defence and NATO. It's well underway what they want. Plus there's city-state idea, the same thing as Birkenhead talked about, for a manageable society of the proper kind of people in their city-state, all the especially bred ones to serve the elite at the top. And they said that the future wars will be limited and more very high-tech wars between occasional city-state until they all agree to be one again, one governmental system worldwide.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of way to it.
Yeah, I suppose the way they've done it in China is
that... I should mention, too, that the United Nations publishes every year or two the IQ tests for the same countries over and over. We've dropped about 5 to 7 points IQ in the last 10 years or so. That doesn't happen by itself.
Not at all. The whole point of China is that they've brought in the one-child policy, that they have a culture whereby infanticide is fine if it's a girl you're going to kill, and it's no wonder the population is going to go down if there's hardly any women around. It's going to take its toll, isn't it?
It has more of an effect too. That's also the reason that they promote so much homosexuality, to alleviate the actual sexual drive amongst just the men that's left. You see, things like that. So they've taken care of everything. They've thought of everything that they'd have to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll leave it on that cheery note, and we'll talk again next month. I believe January 15th. I think you're next on.
Okay.
So
it.
Okay.
You take care.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Alan.
Yep.
Cheers.